Welcome everyone to MailFuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about Guillermo del Toro's Cabinet of Curiosities. Episode 5 is called Pickman's Model. So, full spoilers for the episode. I'm going to be upfront here and say this is probably my least favourite of the episodes so far, by a reasonable margin. A lot of that is down to taste more than anything else. This episode is directed by Keith Thomas, who directed The Vigil, like a year, 2 years ago. And that was a movie that got a lot of praise, and I thought it started strong and really didn't like it that much by the time it got to like the back half. And it's really just down to my taste and how sort of supernatural or spooky stories unfold. There's a kind of a there's a method to it where, you know, this episode in particular is obviously veering to more of a Lovecraftian idea, right? And I think it's based on a story. I don't know how accurate it is to that story, but it's, from a conceptual level, I'm kind of into the ideas. I'm kind of into this idea of like be consumed with horror. The plot of this episode being that this main character Thurber is an artist in his kind of college days, and he runs into Crispin Glover's character, Pickman, who paints these sort of more grotesque images, and once our main character sees them, he starts to see things and he starts to sort of become overcome with this like evil and dread and all these other things. Conceptually, I'm kind of into that. I mean, the one thing I like about cosmic horror and the idea about that appeals to me is this idea of like something that we as people just cannot comprehend. We can't describe it or visualize it because it's too big. And I think if a piece of work can actually give me that feeling, I think I would love it. I think I would love that feeling of existential dread, of like something that feels bigger than us that we can't even begin to comprehend. I think that appeals to me. But a lot of stuff that kind of delves into these stories tend to handle it a bit more like a more general supernatural story, where we see, you know, something that's akin to a ghost walking around in a jump scare. It's kind of played a bit more straight in a way that doesn't really do much for me, and this episode kind of falls into that realm for me, where you have the main character kind of seeing things and acting out in public in front of people, which has got that kind of cringe factor to it, and people wondering if he's okay. In fact, probably what my least favorite trope in all of horror might be where the main character is seeing something supernatural, whether it's like this or a haunted house or whatever, and the other characters don't believe them and think they're just going crazy. 9 times out of 10, I'm kind of like just painfully bored by that. It's never really been my favorite thing. Now, obviously, there's always exceptions. There's examples that have got a different style to how they're told or directed or whatever it may be. But by and large, I don't tend to enjoy those types of stories. And this episode definitely falls into that category where you've got Thurber acting out in front of like his potential, you know, future wife's father at like a garden party, and then later on you've got him acting out because there's a time jump in the episode. You know, we start in like 1903 or something like that, and then we skip ahead to the 1920s, and he's older and he's married her and he's got a kid. I mean, what I will say is there was kind of like an implication in the episode that this existential fear was maybe standing in place for his potential alcoholism. There's not too much on it, but there is at one point the wife asks, you know, I need to know if you're drinking again. He's accused of drinking the first time he acts out at the party in the earlier part of the episode, and it was like, okay, I can kind of see the comparison that one wants to make there. This idea that this addiction, this illness is kind of always going to leer over your head, and it's always going to have this pull on you. I don't know if the actual rest of the content of the episode necessarily fits with that, but I do appreciate the idea of it at the very least. Obviously, I was expecting to see a cool creature by the end because it was kind of teasing it in some of the paintings. And you do see a creature. It doesn't really do much, though. It just kind of pops out and drags Crispin Glover's body back into a well. There's really not a whole lot of interesting payoff for me. And after all this, you're kind of just left with the characters and how it handles its creepier moments, which is when Thurber's seeing things, possibly hallucinating, and some of it just, you know, feels a bit hokey to me. Like, you know, Crispin Glover early on, when he shows him his artwork back at his apartment, and this is the first time he becomes kind of entranced with it, and Thurber's looking at it, and he's starting to feel kind of weird. Crispin Glover tells him this story about how his like ancestor was burned for being a witch, and she was accused of having this feast with her coven and all this stuff. And later on in the episode, Thurber has like a dream moment where he's looking up at the entire coven, and the witch like fades into the center of the frame and is looking down at him. All that stuff like does nothing for me. I feel nothing watching any of this, and part of this is, I think, down to taste. I don't think this necessarily is going to be true of everyone, but gothic horror for me, it needs that special direction to really give me the feeling of the dread or the terror that it's trying to actually invoke. A lot of the time I end up just kind of feeling just, I don't know, just ambivalent about it. So yeah, I can't say this one drew me in all that much. Like, I appreciate the idea if there was more genuine weird things. There's a moment after he first sees Crispin Glover's paintings, when he goes out into the street, and there's like a carriage goes by, and it's like a man sucking on a woman's breast, but the woman's breast is like all like black veins and, like, you know, looks diseased or dying. And that was such a weird visual that, like, I was kind of into that. Like, that was kind of a cool little creepy moment. But, you know, and I feel like a lot of the things people are going to praise about this, probably, I imagine, are some of the creepier moments with the humans, and the humans that are hurt or missing eyes. You know, when he comes back home at the end, the big ending is that, you know, this evil has infected his family, even though he tried to burn the paintings, even though he tried to cancel the gallery showing when all the paintings showed up. I think that's part of my problem with this type of story, and how it's handled, is that it kind of just feels like anything can happen because the supernatural side can just make it happen. So we have this big thing where, you know, Crispin Glover shows up years later in the new part of the timeline, and Thurber's not happy about this. He wants to stay away from his family. You know, he shows up there one night and he feels like this pressure of Crispin Glover closing in. And he goes to see Crispin Glover after his son wakes up screaming one night, and it's like, oh, is he starting to have these fears and these like demented ideas that his father's having, that his father's been kind of like dealing with and thought he'd gotten rid of, but now Crispin Glover's back in his life and he's starting to have them again. When he goes to confront Crispin Glover, he goes to his place, and you know, there's a lot of creepy imagery of, like, you know, him with the lantern walking through these narrow hallways, and it's all fine, but it ultimately gets to a point where he ends up burning all the paintings. And then we skip ahead, and this big art showing, because, you know, now he's like part of the board for an art gallery or whatever. You know, it's meant to be all these paintings. He brings his wife and son and says, hey, go and explore. I want you guys to be the first to see this showing. And then obviously there's the big sort of shock where one of the guys he works with, who kind of reintroduced Crispin Glover to the group again, is, you know, he's got stabbed in the eye, and he's talking like he's Renfield from Dracula. The evil's coming, blah, 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 you know, that kind of thing. And, you know, Thurber runs and tries to hide the paintings from his family and tells them to leave and tries to stop the spread of the evil because he thinks these paintings can get in your head, because that's what he's experienced. And that's fine, but like my problem with this is just the idea that you can kind of see it coming, that all these paintings will just be the evil paintings that he already burned. And I also just don't like that, because it just kind of feels like, well, nothing he did mattered, so it just kind of happened. And I get that there's kind of this interesting problem with tackling this type of material where you're talking about this sort of force that can just do anything, but one of the things that I often feel in stories where the supernatural force is so powerful that it can just do anything, I often feel like it's hard to get invested in the story because I feel like there's no point. I never really feel like the characters have a chance. and because of that, I find it very difficult to care about what's going on. There's exceptions, and I think where it can work for me is you have to sort of present the Force as being like uncaring for the main character, and they're just kind of caught up in it, and there's kind of like sort of like an unraveling maybe mythology to kind of expose from it or something like that. You know, because there's absolutely examples, a very different type of story, but I tend to like the works of David Lynch, and some of his stories have these like larger than life forces at play. You know, Twin Peaks kind of has that. And I think what I like about it in those is the way he tells the story and the way he teases out the mysteries, and the way the characters get caught up into it. Partly, I think there is always kind of that feeling that maybe like the human characters have a chance. They have a chance ultimately to maybe finally eke out a victory. I think that's important. But even if they don't, I think the way it's embodied, if it's something that feels like it's whenever it's like something where a spirit, a cosmic entity, a demon, whatever it is, if they've set their sights on a character that they want to ultimately beat, if the story feels like they can just do anything anytime they want and there's no rules for them as to how they operate, I tend to get sucked out of the story and I just don't care about the threat, about the character's chances of surviving. I just don't find it that compelling normally. Again, the execution here is kind of the key thing. Because I wouldn't necessarily say there's anything wrong with the direction in this episode, and it is, you know, stylish, it looks typically quite visually good, but by and large, it's still just doing a very good example of the sort of thing that I just tend to not like, and doesn't work for me. So, yeah, I found this very unengaging, and I found myself kind of zoning out a little bit, and just not really being that intrigued by the story, by the villain, and certainly didn't really enjoy the propulsion and the drama, because I never really felt like the main character had a chance. And the funny thing is that's technically true for all these episodes. Like, these have all been tragic stories where the main character, whether they deserve it or not, ultimately is going to meet some kind of a demise. But one of the things I like so much about the autopsy is that even though he was going to be defeated ultimately, the main character, like, you know, went out with an act of defiance that saved a lot of people. Like, he sort of like took some agency in the moment. And I guess that's my big problem with this type of story, is that I always feel like the main character or characters don't really have agency. They think they do. The story pretends they do up until a point, but then ultimately the gotcha ending is always, oh, you never stood a chance, and it was always coming for you. And I don't really get into those stories. So I admit this is kind of a weird review, in that I'm kind of critiquing this type of concept more than I'm critiquing how this episode handles it. But I will admit my faults where I have them, and one of my faults is that when it's something like this that I just don't like, I find it very hard to objectively just judge how it's doing, like, in its own realm, if you will. I find myself just being reminded of all the reasons why I don't like it. That's not to say that the performances are bad. I think Ben Barnes, who I know from a role on Westworld, he's fine here. Crispin Glover's alright. Crispin Glover looks great in this. His accent was a little, I don't know, sometimes it felt like it was a bit comical how much he was putting on the accent, the Massachusetts accent or whatever it is, but he did look the part. As soon as he showed up and he has that kind of hunched over, and his hair is still the same as it was in Back to the Future, it's kind of wild. How obviously he looks older, but how he's kind of kept a look about him this whole time. He definitely fits a horror story, but yeah, so might be more down to taste than anything else, but this was easily my least favorite of the episode so far. So but that's Pickman's Model. So let me know what you thought of this one in the comments below. You can like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Get me on the Twitters, @mailed_fuzz for channel updates. You can get me on Twitter @Wibble89, and of course you can support all the content by hitting the super thanks button for a one-time donation, or you can go over and support us at patreon.com/mailfuzztv on an ongoing basis to help keep all the content coming. But that is me, so thank you once again for watching or listening. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?